Gentlemen, welcome back. This is Performance Talk. We are here again, Yul Gordon and Chris Costa, bringing you news and information. Nah, I'm just kidding. Chris, how you doing?
How are you? What's the news and information you got?
Nah, I was just kidding.
No, you weren't. You got some kind of news and information.
Nah, man, don't
What's
try to
news and exciting.
There's nothing out there. Nah, we're just out here. Look, I got on my tractor this morning, cut about a half acre. After my lawnmower broke last week, the freaking tractor went down today. Well, it didn't go down. It's just a bolt came off of the little PTO that spins the blade. And that's about an hour for me to fix. If you knew what you were doing, it'd be about 20 minutes for somebody who actually knew what they were doing. But it took me 20 minutes to figure out what was wrong. So take about another hour for me to get everything off of it and put it back on and then do that. So that's what I'm doing. Chris,
Texas problems.
Yeah, Chris, what you got going on, Chris? Anything?
Saturday, man. No.
Saturday? You on the move? You on the move today, or you just hanging out?
Probably not. Man, I'll just lay low. I like it that way.
Sometimes, man, you hit the road, and I don't know where you are within 5 states. So, but you're on the East Coast, so
I've been known to do that occasionally.
On the East Coast, it's easy to get from state to state, though, or easier than out here.
Yeah.
You got to drive 5 hours to get out of the state of Texas.
Part of the fun of paying a lot more money to live somewhere.
Nah, that ain't even fun. You can't even make that a joke. So why don't you introduce the guest today, Chris, and let's get the show rolling.
Yeah, so let's welcome Mr. Greg Amorelli to Performance Talk. Greg, how are you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself so our viewers and listeners can get to know you a little bit.
Thanks, Yul. Thanks, Chris. Nice to meet both of you, and thanks for having me on the podcast. A little bit about me. So my experience, my background is working with tactical athletes, so police, military, and fire. And I've been a coach for general population sports teams and tactical athletes for about 18 years. And I've been a tactical athlete myself for about 15, going on 15 or 16 of those years. So I think kind of what I'm able to bring to the table in the tactical realm is not only am I a coach, but I'm also a practitioner, which is something that it came about due to a series of injuries in my beginning part of my military experience that brought me here today. We didn't have strength and conditioning when I was first getting into the military. And so seeing the value of that, seeing how that has a anti-injury or preventative aspect to it has really kind of turned into a passion. So that's what I do now.
So let's, we've had similar experiences basically because you serve and I served with a past tense on it. But early on in your military career, talk to me about how you felt about how physical fitness was approached. I have an opinion, but our listeners have heard my opinion several times. It's not necessarily did I think bad of it. I think the effort was great, but practically, what we tested, what we used as a test didn't measure what I think the military or tactical athletes needed. So we were doing one thing for a test and then taking that test and making decisions off of it. And we weren't testing what we thought we were testing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, while I think the test did a decent job of kind of hitting the target as far as, is somebody physically fit, quote unquote. I think it was a little bit trying to hit a 100-meter target with a shotgun blast.
Yep.
And what I do like is there's been a recent trend to kind of tighten up the shot group with that. Especially with the Army's ACFT, and there's a lot of people who have different opinions about it. I actually kind of like it. I think it's fun, but maybe that says something about my headspace there. But I think it's a lot better test. I mean, it's not perfect, but it does a better job than the old Army fitness test.
Yeah, let's be real. giving the military credit over years and years of doing whatever they did for physical fitness. They had the major challenge of, trying to find a test that worked for 400,000 people.
Yeah. Which is a big challenge.
Yeah. And that's, it depending on what you're doing, you either lower the fitness standard way down, or it's too high to maintain, or like you said, it's a shotgun blast and it doesn't hit everything that you're trying to get to. So,
well, I think, looking back at my own experience, like when I first got in, so I got into the Navy in 2008 and I was 28 at the time. I was the old guy.
Yeah.
And,
I know that pain too when I came in.
Oh, the plot thickens with that one. We'll probably get into that later, and I remember my thought process behind it was, or it is now, is I could see at the time the physical fitness test.
Right.
I think that's what it is in the Navy. I can't remember. It's been years. I saw that as kind of like an entry exam. It's like you pass that. It's like, okay, you're fine. And the actual fitness assessment was a lot of times your schooling. When I went through as a rescue swimmer, it was pretty physically demanding.
Right. And go ahead.
Oh, we had our own SAR fitness test, which had a lot of more job and task specific elements to it, which I thought was a great test. But you didn't see that in the larger military.
Right. I think in schools you see it, where they the standard is a little different based on what school you go to. So like for the Army, Ranger School and all those things, airborne school, the standard is a little different, but you're still chasing, you were anyway. And I can't speak to it now because I've been gone so long, while I try to keep up with it, I'm not doing it every 6 months.
Yeah.
So, but I always felt like we were chasing a look and a body type.
Bingo. So,
as opposed to, is that man or woman really fit?
Well, I remember, so let's see, what was it? So I was out of my schooling. So for SAR, you're about 2 years, maybe a little under, for your total school pipeline. And then you go to your first squadron. And I remember a lot of the workout stuff we were doing, for the most part, you were kind of on your own. And we had some guys doing, heavy lifting and more powerlifting style stuff. And then, myself and other guys were doing, what did you get off of bodybuilding.com?
Right.
Which I think led to an injury that I got actually back in school because I didn't know any better. And then how I worked my way out of that injury is, what brought me here today as a coach.
Right. So I preceded your experiences by 4 years. I was already retired 4 years when you joined the Navy. So,
okay.
So what we ran into a lot back then, and I know when you came into the service, there was already some changes going on.
Correct.
So what basically we ran into, or I ran into coming out of, being an athlete in college and things like that. And, then going to these tests, it was like, we had a 2-mile run, push-ups and sit-ups, and that was the test. And my question, I always questioned it, never said anything about it, but always questioned it because of my background, before I came in the Army. And I was the old guy too at 25, 26. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, we're not testing what we're supposed to test. And then regardless of whether or not you passed the APFT, if you didn't look a certain way, then you had to endure a tape test and weight and height and all this other stuff because you looked out of shape. It didn't matter what your score was. I mean, oftentimes, my score was over 275. I think one time with an injury, I scored 245 or 250 or whatever it was. But it was 275 to 295 because I couldn't run. I couldn't run according to the test.
Right.
But that's, if you see my body style, not very tall, kind of, spent a lot of time in the weight room, played football in college. So I wasn't built to run 2 miles.
I know that story.
So that frustration, followed me. And then finally I got a chance, when they started changing the APF to respond to the changes. And but the question that was, as a commander at that time, the questions were, hey, the statement was, hey, give us your feedback. I did 22 pages of feedback.
Oh, wow.
But not, that was coming from a background in the field of performance, fitness, weightlifting, and those kind of things, athletics, and not understanding at the time that I found out later that the guys who were writing the test or making the changes to the test were all doctors, physical therapists. They weren't practitioners. They weren't saying practitioners, and those kind of things didn't start coming along till about the time you entered.
Yeah.
So when you came in, obviously there were practitioners maybe at the group levels and the brigade levels and higher.
Yeah.
But they were more advisors to, the units down below, and they still had the master fitness courses and the ACE certifications, which were, that's a great shot in the dark at getting the people where they need to be, but it was all group training, which is what they learn at drill sergeant school. You know what I mean? So a lot of those guys really weren't getting much more than they already knew than they had.
Yeah,
except the title.
Yeah, and that's, when I went through, so when I was going through it 2008, it was just push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, and run. That was what you did for your tests. So that's what you did for a lot of your workouts. And then the stuff you did in between that was, whatever you found off bodybuilding.com, because, biceps somehow made the job better. And there was no, to my knowledge, there was no talk of, actual structured strength conditioning for at least my job. I can't speak to, at the team level. We were stationed on North Island, Coronado, and NAB was 2 miles down the road. I don't know what they had, if they had anything at the time. I know they have strength coaches now.
I think they were starting to get athletic trainers in the building at the time.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, they were getting athletic trainers to fix you if you were already broke.
Yeah, but what about not getting broke?
Right.
How about we start there? Yeah, and I think that was a big piece that was missed. And I think the military is starting to catch on. I don't think they're there yet, but I like the direction they're going. And let's face it, it's not going to be perfect. We know that. It's hard.
No expectation for it to be perfect.
Yeah, but if it's better, then
right. And I think I'm going to give the services credit, and I think the services do a good job of coming along, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
there's not fast change, so they weren't going to dump the old APFT and pick up something new right away.
Yeah,
but you can chronologically you can see it getting better, and when they brought along athletic trainers, that got better. A lot of those athletic trainers had the CSCS already, so they could help in the other side if asked. And then I think in 2015, 16, the real push came when you got, almost unit level, or the thought of having unit level strength coaches became something that was, being planned for, if not implemented at certain levels.
Yeah. And I think that was, like anything in the military and the government, it's just going to take a long time to get there. And so, but the fact that they had that thought back in, 2016, it's taken a little bit to get there, but I still think they're on the right track. Yeah. I think where we're having the deficiency right now is I see a lot of success and progression in the active duty. I think the hard part is what you're going to find in the National Guard and the reserves. Yeah. Which when I got out of the Navy active duty after 6 years, took about a year break, year and a half, and then got into the National Guard. I think the difference is, with active duty, that's part of their life. That's part of their daily thing. Like you're active duty 30 out of 30 days of the month.
Right.
with the National Guards and reserve units, you know, those men and women, us, like I'm in the reserves right now, you know, you have one drill weekend a month. So 6 to 7% of your entire month is military service. And so, you know, the rest of that time, the 90, 93, 94% of the time, you're out in society, you're out in culture. And what's the state of the U.S. culture right now is low fitness, poor nutrition, poor health. And so I think the National Guard and the reserves have a pretty heavy battle up against them in regards to keeping soldier and sailor name and fitness.
There's a real challenge there.
Yeah.
Specifically with some of the remote stations
that
are out there. And there might not even be, you know, forget about putting a state-of-the-art, you know, training facility in the National Guard armory. Forget about that because of the cost. It's a big cost up front to get.
Well, it's a cost, and then you also have a situation in most places where, you know, you might have your central armory, or, you know, even several armories around the state, but that doesn't mean that the soldiers are going to be nearby.
Right. That's where I was going to get to. So you have this big facility, but you can't justify, you know, the spend for it because you're only there once a week. I mean,
right.
So they got to join the gym at home or figure it out, you know, out on the farm or wherever they are.
Yeah. And I think right now I've been asked, I'm at an H2F National Guard, what am I thinking? A national level think tank or group working on the H2F for the National Guard.
Right.
And we're currently trying to crack that problem. Is, okay, great, we have the information, but how do you give that information to soldiers in this case, who only spend 6 to 7% of their time in military duty per month? And then the more important part is how do you get them to act upon that? How do you get them to care when, you know, that's not their daily habit, that's not who they are on a day-to-day basis?
And that's not, let's bring it back down to some real talk here. That's not, you know, their National Guard service, unless they get activated for some reasons, that's not paying the bills.
Correct. Exactly. So
they have to go to work, and they can't just go home and work out.
Exactly. And you know, I've got soldiers that I work with now, and that I have worked with, that, you know, they tell me, they're like, you know, this doesn't pay my bills. My main job, which does pay my bills, I'm working 12 hours a day. I don't have the opportunity to work out because now I got to come home and be a spouse and a parent.
Right.
Because like there's just no time. You know, I don't really feel for those soldiers, because it's not easy when this is not your life every day.
Right. And you can't ask them to spend more money on gym memberships or expensive equipment or things like that. So that's a unique problem to the reserves and the National Guard, and how you guys figure that out. I'd really like to stay close to that, because me as a private practitioner, I reach out to those individuals, and down here in San Antonio, it's called Military City for a reason. Everybody's here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the reason I reach out to them. One of the things, and I'm gonna kind of jog off to the side on this one a little bit. One of the things that really got me is I had been physically training soldiers and paying attention to that for years, but physically doing it. Then all of a sudden, there is a requirement for a certification. Now, I wouldn't be upset if the NSCA would have told me, okay, the TSAC is going to be over and beyond the CSCS, but they told me the opposite. They said if you have the CSCS, you can do everything. Well, not everything, but you can do
right.
you can do all of these things in strength training. That's our premier strength coach thing. I said, okay, I don't need to get this other certification then, because I lived it for, you know, 19 and 3/4 years. And then I've trained it for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So I don't need that. Well, when I come to your office, you have been mandated that you can't hire somebody who doesn't have that certification, regardless of if they got the next higher certification.
Right.
That in my brain, and that's not the Army's fault, because you say that, they bought into, hey, you did this for tactical athletes. This is what we do. This is what we have. I want them to have that.
Well, I think you're starting to see a change. I think we're in this transition point right now and again, this is just my opinion. This is how I see it is, really the first few years of, let's take the Army and the ACFT and the H2F program. I think the first few years is really just like, okay, we're putting a lot of money and a lot of effort into this. Let's see if this works.
Right.
And in that span of time, whether it's 5 or 7 years, I think there's a lot of shuffle going around. I think I read somewhere where like the U.S. Army went from one of the smallest employers of strength coaches in the country to like the largest overnight.
Right.
And you see it. You see it. Yeah, you see it. You see it on LinkedIn. There's always job posts for Gap or Exos or any of the contracting companies hiring for strength coaches for different facilities. Like daily, they're coming out.
Right.
And so I think as the ranks start to fill, there's right now, I don't know if there's much of a standard. Being in Eugene, there's no base around me, so I haven't had the opportunity to apply for any of those because I'm here and I got to stay here. But I'm assuming at some point that there's going to be a standard of like, hey, you have to have this, you have to have this, and you have to have this level of education.
This is I know that the NSCA is working on that themselves, and I'll let them plug their own stuff. But they're going. In my opinion, they're going the right direction with the tactical stuff.
Yeah,
the services and all you guys are out there working. I think are fantastic. I didn't like the rollout because there was a little bit there was a lack of education in where you were coming into the continuum at. Where is the TSAT?
Yeah, I can see that.
And where you have a whole bunch of guys up here that have been training tactical athletes before there was a certification, that unless they went back and got that certification, you miss out on a whole bunch of experience. And that's kind of where I see, where the services are trying to catch up now. Okay, we have all these athletes, but where do they go for more? Oh, well, they can study for the CSCS. Well, what do they got to have? They got to have this, and this. Oh, well, we don't have that. Okay, but you say there's people out there that have these qualifications. Mm-hmm. Yes, they're out there. Most of them, I would say most are in close to or in my age bracket, which is, I'll say 52 to 62. So most of them are right there, and they'll work for you. Not sure that they want to take a test. And it's not the test. You know what I mean? It's not the test. It's I've seen the test and I could pass the test tomorrow. It's just that we were never asked. The people that were already doing it were never asked, what do you think?
Well, where do you see the field going? Let's have that conversation as far as not just with tactical athletes, but just general fitness as a whole. I mean, that's actually one of the things I'm really interested in now is where's the field going? I think as a whole, the science of exercise as a whole is starting to kind of disseminate to the general population, into the military, and what we're starting to see is some very, like, we always knew health and exercise was very much related to overall health. But now we actually have qualitative and quantitative data that supports that to the molecular level, to the genetic level. And what I'm curious to see is how is that going to be, what's the future of exercise science and performance going to be, not only in the tactical space, but in the general population sense?
Well, I think, and Chris can testify to this, that's really you turn the tables on us a little bit, because that's usually a question we ask if we get that far. But the future, I think, Chris, you can chime in here. The future of exercise science, I think, lies in the actual science and the understanding of what certain things do for you or don't do for you.
Yeah.
Should we, we talk about loads, we talk about frequency, we talk about, measurements of all kinds. And when does it cross over from focus on exercise to a focus on health?
And I think it's starting to shift that way. At least I see the whisperings of it. For example, there's a kind of a newer field being developed. I would say being developed, but I guess that's a good way to put it. Is exercise neuroscience. I had a conversation with a professor at University College in London, Dr. Ronka, who is, from what I can tell, one of the few experts in the world. There's a few others out there, but actually being able to understand the biochemistry and the neurochemistry of neurochemical results of exercise, like increasing BDNF and in the brain, which increases or grows new brain cells. Stuff like this, where I think they figured some of this stuff out, back in 2012 and 2013, and it's just now kind of picking up steam.
Okay. No, I had
a little bit of a tangent there, but
no, that's okay. I was thinking about that a little bit, and I can't. There's no reason for me to say that anything you just said was wrong. I kind of agree with you on that. The neuroside, the neuroscience is picking up a little bit. It's coming into. I think where clarification is needed is where does it help the athlete? Where does it help the tactical athlete? And when is it just health and fitness?
Well, I think maybe that's a fair question. And I guess one of the ways I've always looked at performance is, okay, maybe this will kind of resonate a little bit. I think as strength and conditioning performance coaches, a lot of times we are so focused on performance. That's our bread and butter. That's what we're trained to do.
Right.
One thing I noticed, though, is it was something I felt being in the military, is there's a focus on performance, but there wasn't a lot of focus on that health as a foundational piece.
Right.
And that's where I'm starting to see the shift and the transition. And I think that's where the future is kind of going to push towards, is more of a health first approach.
Now, I think you're absolutely correct on the tactical side.
Yeah.
I don't ever think the athletic side will go away from performance, because your performance on the athletic side is always going to be what you're, let's just be, you're going to be judged by it. You're going to be paid by it. If you're
absolutely,
you're going to be matriculated along the path of success by it. So what did you do? How many times have we found out athletes had conditions or issues or injuries, but we couldn't have, told that by their performance, because they performed, well, if not great in some cases. But
right. Balance there.
Go ahead.
And the athletic population, they're starting to realize there's a balance.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's not just about performance. Right? Overall health and well-being is a pretty good predictor of, is that person hitting their optimal performance? If you know what their optimal performance is, essentially, how often do they hit that? Right?
Well, I think that's, you're right. I think that's a message that's getting out to the athletic population, pro athletes and such. I think that message is also getting out to tactical athletes. It's just maybe a little bit slower for the uptake. Particularly working with like law enforcement right now, which I have the opportunity to do. First of all, convincing them to treat their physical fitness as a sport. We talked about the concept of tactical athlete, which some people agree with, some people won't. But actually having them look at their physical fitness through that lens, and then going back and realizing that, like, hey, you might be pushing the needle on your performance or your practice, But let's take a step back and actually look at your sleep and your nutrition and your recovery and your mental states and all that kind of stuff, and actually build that foundation of health first before we then try to attack the performance aspect. And I think that's kind of a newer concept for a lot of the tactical population, mainly due to the nature of their jobs. I mean, if you've got a police officer, firefighter that, you're working 12-hour shift.
Yeah. What do you mean sleep?
Or 24 hours. Yeah, 24-hour shift. One of the firefighters I'm working with right now is, she's like, I'll start a work. I have to choose between sleep and a workout. If I start a workout, inevitably 20 minutes in, I get call, and it's just, how do you do that? And I think I think that's kind of the next step that's already happening, is talking about the health, as a foundation before, really focusing on improving the performance.
If we can get people,
it's tough. You're never going to be able to linearly put forth this idea and understanding of a balance between performance and well-being, specifically from, say, the athletic populations through your tactical based, because as you mentioned, there's so many variances in expectations. How do you account for X, Y, and Z? That's where there's just flat out no comparison.
Yeah.
And there's going to be arguments on both sides, right? There'll be an argument probably on the, say, professional athlete side, where they'll say, yeah, well, we don't work 12 hours, but we might be in the facility at 8 a.m. practicing, training at our home field, home court, right? Home arena for a 7:30 game. And then on a plane at 11 p.m., 10:30 to fly to the next spot. And that might be the West Coast. That might be even the middle of the country.
Right.
And, did they put in a 12-hour day? Sure. But is it the same kind of grind? No, obviously not. There's a lot more time for rest. There's a lot more downtime. And, the professional athletes then may argue, well, there's a lot of downtime for your tactical base too. There's a lot of times where they're not active, right? They may be sitting in a vehicle or in a barracks or, waiting for something to happen. And it's like, yeah, well, but that also means that there is a switch that has to flip. They might be in a completely relaxed state and have to go into a heightened awareness state, which is very similar to sports. It's just that with sports, it's pre-planned. You know what's coming.
Yeah.
You can plan for those changes. You can plan for adaptations to the environment around you. The only thing that's really truly tactical, I think, in sports is your opponent.
Yeah, it's the big unknown.
Try to accommodate what they're delivering you, what they're giving you, and try to accommodate to, what do I need to change here? What do we need to do philosophically? What do we need to do technically to counteract what they're doing? That's tactical, but that's about the extent, I think, of really true comparison.
Yeah, I think like the conversation I try to have with my tactical athletes is, just like regular athletes. So we always strive for optimal. Sports athlete is always going to strive what's optimal.
Right.
And it's the same for tactical athletes. It's the same for general population. It's like, okay, what is optimal? Okay, now let's look at what's realistic. And a lot of times there's a massive gap there. And sometimes the challenge is, number one, getting them from 0 to what's realistic. And then number 2, for some of the hard chargers, is being okay with that gap between realistic and optimal. Are we ever going to get...
What do you mean by being okay with the gap?
Yeah, being okay with the gap.
Okay to you?
What's that?
What is being okay, in your opinion?
Being able to accept it. I mean, like I said, the firefighters and police officers that I work with now, it'd be nice to be able to work out 5-6 days a week, have great nutrition, have great sleep. We can put that map of what's optimal, but we have to put the job into there. And that brings us down to what's realistic and realizing that, hey, you're not going to get to that optimal. Like the job is not going to allow you to, but that's okay, because we're still doing better than what we may have been doing before, which is maybe nothing.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
The baseline, right?
You're shifting your baseline.
Is likely going to be better than the previous efforts. right? It should be in most cases. If it's not, then
Exactly.
it begs the question of the practitioner: are we doing the right thing, or do we need to adapt to this individual's needs?
Yeah.
I think the big thing here that I'm taking from our conversation is, or this part of the conversation anyway, is getting the athlete to consider, the health side, and then also, just talking about, how to go about doing it gets the ball rolling.
Yeah. And I think, I'd say so. And I think there's a lot of athletes that I know that they have this idea of where they should be. And I think a lot of people in this culture have kind of like an all or nothing idea. Well, if I can't get here, then I'm not even going to bother. And so kind of working with the tactical athletes as far as what's realistic based on their job, based on, if I've got somebody who's deployed and they may or may not have all the time in the world, they may or may not have adequate sleep and nutrition, but doing the best you can, like here's optimal. Now we're going to bring it down to reality and let's try to hit reality. And be okay with that.
Hence the reason why I think they have developed training the way that they've developed it. It seems harsh. It seems abnormal. But, if we take, for instance, we've been talking about the SEALs a lot lately, BUDS, right? And it is designed to break you down. Yeah. It's designed to be potentially harder than field operation. Because if you can't get through that, you can't get through field operation. You'll never be able to sustain that type of stress. And so let's stress them to the max right now. And I think that was a subconscious thing. It just became, you guys can probably speak to this. It just became kind of the way. This is what we're going to do. This is how we reach determining who is our most elite.
Well, I think when we use that term elite levels of the elite units in all the services. Yeah, there's some physically grueling stuff in there, but I've always said that everything in the military is made to pass physically. You can pass it. You can pass it physically. It can be done. Mentally, emotionally, can you deal with the physical distraction you're going to have to accomplishing what you need to accomplish?
I think that's pretty spot on.
That's what it is. It is the psychological distress that, and this goes back to Greg's comment about neurophysiology.
Right.
And the neural link to our physiology is very important. And we've known this, but I think from an exercise science standpoint, we spend very little time talking about this.
Putting it together, yeah. Linking.
Very little effort goes into, and you spend some time at A&P on it, but there's no courses directly at the undergraduate level directly related to neurophysiology.
Yeah.
So you learn to touch on the nerve plexus and, the branches and, what a nerve does and how it
what they are,
and what's responsibility it has across all tissue platforms within the body. And that's about the extent of it. And then we start to talk about the implications of neural fatigue, right? But what we don't really dive deeply into is neural fatigue is strongly linked to hydration and sleep and the amount of times that a muscle has been required to fire and or not fire.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing as performance. So it's all interlinked and intercrossing, intersectional, right? Interdependent, in fact, even intradependent of each ability. So whether you're a tactical athlete or a professional athlete, you're going to run into situations where those attributes are going to be challenged. They're going to be challenged differently. There'll be different sets of expectations. There'll be different outside environmental cues and shifts that you have no control over. How do you adapt to that? It's all about wherever you come from. It's all about adaptation. And it's our job, whether we're in the tactical realm or we're in the technical realm, to implement as much of that stress as we possibly can naturally. And I think that's where we get into the weeds. We just had a podcast a few days ago. We kind of talked a little bit about this. How do you emulate real life experiences in the tactical realm?
It's hard.
by fire drills, right? But is that really what it's going to be like if you're there?
Yeah, I mean, you can emulate the wearing of the, you go with the wearing of the equipment, the moving of the equipment, the operation of the equipment, but you can't. It's hard to get those stressors you're talking about, that we're talking about, to be at the same level that they are when you got a blaze standing in front of you, and you've been holding the hose for however much amount of time. Now you got to do something else. And it's just as important or just as critical to what you're trying to accomplish. And where's, how do we emulate that stress? We can't.
That's one of those unique situations where you have to fight a fire, right? So the, controlled fire situations, but that's a unique challenge in and of itself, because you have to have obviously the land to be able to do it. You have to have the structure to be able to ignite. Right. You have to plan that if things go poorly, what are you going to do about it? You have to plan if things go well. Is that what we want to do? Is that how it's going to work? And circling back to the science, I don't know in that realm. Obviously, I don't have experience in that realm. If there's a way to really use science to adapt that, to make it better, fire is fire, right? Heat has to happen in order for fire to occur. We need heat and light. It's so archaic and so natural that it's different. But to circle back, say, to the tactical side, science has made a lot of changes now, right? Mm-hmm. We now have, I believe, apparatus that can go on your gear that you can feel like it's live combat, but you're not actually firing any rounds.
Yeah.
You have all the gear at full weight, and you're operating in a situation where it's like it's live, but you're never going to face a real live bullet, but you're going to know, because the science, the technology that's on your body is going to thump you.
Well, I think that brings us closer to the experience, but without it actually being in the experience in itself. I think there's a missing gap. But it's that old adage of, you never rise to the occasion, you sink to your lowest level of training.
Exactly.
I obviously training has its value for that purpose, if that purpose alone. I do really appreciate what you were talking about as far as the, how we're just starting to learn some of the neurological and like cognitive biological effects, and how that's coming. That's kind of what I was getting to. You actually put it way better than I did, so thanks for that. But I think that's something that's going to be kind of next up. Is we've had sports performance and we've had sports psychology, but I think the neurochemistry and neurobiology is kind of the next piece, especially with regards to tactical athletes, as we start to see some, mental health is such a big thing in the tactical. It's a big topic right now with tactical athletes. And one of the things that I've seen is, for example, on in the grant world, there are several grants out there, multiple grants that talk about giving money towards mental health programs for law enforcement and firefighters. But there's actually very few that will do the same for physical fitness programs.
Right.
For law enforcement and fire. But what we're seeing now is we understand that there's a relationship. We've always known that there was a relationship between exercise and mental health intuitively, but we know we now can follow it on the molecular level. When I flex a muscle, a hormone, a protein is released, which makes its way up through the brain, travels through the blood-brain barrier, interacts with BDNF, and creates a new brain cell. In a very rudimentary way, but I think hopefully what we're going to see is this coming up is this acceptance that these two are linked, and not just not a way of just like, well, we assume. It's like, no, we can actually step by step see it happen. I think that's the next thing that is coming up, especially for tactical athletes. That's such an important factor.
I think the speed at which things get to the appropriate level in a lot of ways what we're talking about, because because we're in the profession, just speaking directly to listeners right now, we're in the profession, so we get to see some of these things kind of bubble to the surface. We see them when they're below the surface. We get to see them bubble to the surface. And then now all of a sudden we're talking to you about, neuroscience, and you're going, what does that matter to me? I don't care. As an athlete or soldier, who's just got off guard duty, and maybe it doesn't matter to you, but here's how it matters. Start connecting your health to what you do outside of just, sleeping, eating, or along with that, but, to exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or just simply realize that they're all interlinked.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's exactly it.
We try to teach the young athletes that all the time. So, you tell them, look, I know you're young, and I know that you cannot sleep. You can sleep for 3 hours. You can be out all night, sleep for 3 hours, and go to practice, and you'll feel like you're going to do just fine, right? And that's because your body, go back to the neurological side, is still very youthful. It's still very young. It's still adapting. It's still developing into your 20s. Like fully, truly developing and finalizing you as a neurological structure, right?
Yeah.
So you're constantly adapting, but then you hit that point where, I hate to say that everything's downhill, but everything starts to go downhill, and it's a very slow.
I'm 46, so that hits me hard. That's truer words. Never spoken.
We're all over 40 years old, so
I'm a good company then.
You remember those conversations, right? When you were the 25-year-old, 30-year-old guy in the room, and the 40-year-old guy was like, "Yeah, just wait until you're X, just wait until you're Y," and you're like, "Yeah," and then it happens, and you realize, right? You realize that there is some decline because for 20 years there's been some decline, neurochemically, physiologically. There's been, but it's so, in many ways, infinitesimal, and that's truly interdependent of the individual, but infinitesimal. It's such a small change that it's not noticed. But compound that over a 10-year period, over a 20-year period, over a 30-year period, and you aren't the same person that you were. So if you can get that young athlete, that young tactician, you can get that young college athlete to realize, I promise you, if you sleep 8 to 10 hours, you will have better cognitive function. You'll be able to get through class easier. You'll have more energy to get through the day. You'll have more energy than when you come into the gym. You're going to wake up more refreshed. You're probably going to lift a few more pounds. I would have to guess that you're going to lift a few more pounds. And you're going to recover from that quicker. In fact, you might even recover from that depending upon how trained you are. You might even recover from that within the day and be able to go out and practice at peak again. Heck, even taking a nap, right? Preparing yourself is so cataclysmically important to any operation that the body has to do, because all we're talking about here, and Greg, which you mentioned with neurophysiology, is stressors on our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Exactly.
And I think what you'll find too in the conversation that maybe is worth having with the tactical athletes, if and when they're ready for it, is, the tactical space is a cortisol dump, right? High cortisol levels winning and waxing throughout the day and at non-optimal times. So, cortisol levels that maybe don't jive with the circadian rhythm. Well, if you talk for male athletes, the levels of cortisol versus testosterone, one's more catabolic in nature, one's anabolic in nature, and they, for the most part, they work in opposition of each other. If you got high cortisol levels, your testosterone levels drop. Well, if you take somebody who's on shift, 12-hour shift, 24-hour shift in a busy place, and it's call after call after call after call.
Right.
Okay, so what's happened on the hormonal level? All right, well, a lot of hard chargers, and maybe we've all done this in our younger years, is, didn't get a lot of sleep last night, getting ready to go on shift. You know what I should do? Let me hit the gym. I'm going to go ahead and burn the boats down. I'm going to get a really hard workout in. That'll probably wake me up and I'll feel better. Well, cortisol. And it's just this spiraling, downward spiral in our physiology and our hormones and everything. And I think you see a lot of tactical athletes when they get to the later part of their career, their physiology is tanked because it's just been nonstop. And I think, I think the big thing is understanding that exercise has a role in this, but it has to have the right role. we have to understand as coaches, we have to understand how to prescribe the right dose, the right type, at the right time. The conversation I have with my firefighter is, hey, she's all over the place as far as her shift goes. And it's like, we started out like, here's the exercise, here's a program I want you to do. Well, that went out the door within the first 2 weeks. And then, so what I have now is I have a program for her that's based around here's your workouts for when you're off shift. Here's a workout for you when you're just starting your shift. Here's what I want you to do if you have the opportunity. And here's what she can do after shift. And then so she's able to kind of plug and play based on her schedule. And it's been extremely beneficial for her. She's like, I'm actually getting stronger for once. She's like, I was just, kind of digging my head in the ground before.
It's like different modes of operation, right?
Yeah.
For different, you try to pre-plan for different variables that those of which you don't know when and where they're coming, but you have alterations programmed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really key in that sector because it is so dynamic.
Yeah. Right? And that drags.
And there's dynamism in sports and college sports and pro sports. We change our programming on a regular basis for an individual because they come in and they said, hey, listen, I had a really stressful night last night. I had a big test, or I had a fight with my spouse, or whatever, and I didn't sleep well. So I just don't have the energy. And that takes some guts to come in.
It does. It really does.
Actual individual and say that to your strength coach.
One of the things that's coming into focus, that I hear from our conversation, and sometimes I listen on the podcast to hear those little ideas that are forming, or those things that are being reinforced. And one of the things that are being reinforced is that this, once we can design all the programs we want, we can have an approach, we can have everything we want from an equipment standpoint. But when it boils down to that, individual, that's where we have to make the changes. It's based on the individual. We can design this program, like the program for your firefighter. She got an individualized program that, that worked for her at specific times. You could have just given her one program and say, hey, do this, whenever you have time to do it. And that's
how we started. And then we realized first 2 weeks, like, no, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
Not practical.
So but you have to do that first to realize that that's not practical. Because again, for some, it may be practical. They may be able to execute that. It might not be too much stress for them to execute that one particular program multiple times a week. Yeah. It may not be a psychological stressor either for them. They might be totally fine doing the same thing. Other individuals aren't going to be okay doing the same thing all the time. Yeah. They're going to get bored, which means what? That then affects performance. They're not going to put the effort into it. Therefore, they're not going to get the results that one would expect. And that takes your programming and throws it out the window because now it's invalid.
Yep.
Doesn't make sense.
Well, I think one of the other things you got to consider, which I know you'll appreciate on this one, is I really love looking at the energy systems involved with tactical athletes.
Right.
That's been one of my big focuses, is not only understanding what energy systems are going to be utilized during a potential call out, what's going to be tapped, what's the counter for that. And so for the firefighter, her program was based on that. Is okay. If you get a call, like you have your 12-hour shift, the chances of you getting a call out within that 12-hour shift, or getting several call outs, are pretty definite. So what energy systems, and I had to walk me through, okay, what's the typical call look like? What's, we kind of talked through the energy systems, the psychological systems, like what's being tapped. And then a lot of the programs we built were the kind of counter to that. Okay, if you're doing something on shift, here's what I want you to do to kind of offset what you might encounter in a call. And then we saved a lot of our maybe our higher intensity work, our strong stuff, our heavy stuff for off shift, which is tactical strength conditioning 101.
Right.
But really kind of getting down to the nuts and bolts of timing is just like, hey, I don't want you to do this, and this on shift, and here's why.
That is, I'd say, functionally and philosophically profound, but also kind of I should be saying natural as well, because I feel
Right.
like you should just know to do that. But very oftentimes somebody just reads some research or reads a blog post and says, okay, this is what I need to do with these athletes because, it worked for them. Well, okay. But it doesn't help you as the individual to understand the individuals that you're working with and the stressors that they experience. Because if we're all three of us are fighting a fire, right, we're all going to have different stress responses. Certain things are going to trip you out that don't trip me out. If we're in a 3-story building, I can guarantee the height is going to trip me out. Falling through a floor is going to trip me out. Might not have any effect on you. You might be like, I'm not afraid of heights. I don't care. Right?
We're gonna let that be the last word on the subject for today, Chris. Do you have a final question?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, why don't you take us out of here, Greg? Very great having you on.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
We're gonna do it again. So
Cool.
look for email from us. But no question, we have at least 7, 8, 9 more podcasts about this. So.
There's a wealth of information to cover in the tactical space, and I think we barely just scratched the surface on this. And I know you've had some prior tactical coaches on there that there's just so much to cover.
Well, we appreciate your time. We know it's not easy to take a break away from stuff. As a coach and as a service member, I appreciate what you're doing.